Hello, EduMagicians. Welcome to the EduMagic Podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fessich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of EduMagic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get on to the episode.
Hey, EduMagicians, and welcome back to another episode of the EduMagic Podcast. My name is Dr. Sam Fessich, and today I have with me Hannah St. Clair from NEA Aspiring Educators. Hannah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I am very excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm super pumped to have you here. I've been following NEA Aspiring Educators and NEA for a while on Instagram, and I am just loving all the support, all the encouragement, all the action that's going on around, especially dismantling the Department of Ed. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about what exactly the Department of Ed does, why is it important to know about it, especially for future teachers in the crowd. Before we begin, Hannah, would you mind sharing a little bit about your role at NEA Aspiring Educators?
Yes. So NEA, the National Education Association, represents about 3 million members across the country. And even abroad, we have federal employees who work on Department of Defense education schools. Within NEA, there are members all the way from aspiring educators, future teachers, future school psychologists, school counselors, all the way to retired members. So aspiring educators are those future educators. We're college students studying to become educators, whether that means we are an education major or maybe we are going into secondary, and so we are biology majors who know we want to go into teaching and plan to get a master's of teaching. So we look a lot of different ways. We're first career aspiring educators, second career aspiring educators. The role is very open to anyone interested in becoming an educator. I'm the national chairperson for aspiring educators. So I represent aspiring educators within the union on various national committees, the budget committee, so all the money of the union, I get to be in those meetings, as well as planning our national conference for aspiring educators, where we have about 300 future teachers and educators come together in person for a conference made by aspiring educators for aspiring educators. And I also have the pleasure of traveling around the country to aspiring educators have at their states, as well as chapter events on their campuses. And so that's a little bit about my role and aspiring educators.
Wow, Hannah, you were like so busy. You get to travel, you get to be at the table and in the room where things happen. And I think that's so exciting. Now, Hannah, are you yourself an aspiring educator?
I am a recent graduate, so I graduated with my Master's of Education from the University of Oregon last June. I did a 1-year master's program, and before that, I got my bachelor's also from the University of Oregon. Got my degree. I am ready to teach, licensed to teach, and in this role, I work for the NEA, the 2-year position, and after this position, I plan to teach in elementary classroom. I love 4th grade, so hoping for 4th grade, that's what I student taught in, but we'll see.
Oh, wonderful. This is fantastic. So you are definitely living that aspiring educator life as a recent grad and then going to be an educator whenever this role is up. So that's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing about that. So let's go ahead and jump into the meat of our conversation today. Let's talk about Department of Ed. Can we just break it down? What does the Department of Education do?
Yeah. So the Department of Education is a federal agency focused on providing funding and accountability measures for our public schools, including elementary, secondary, as well as funding for our public schools for colleges. So our Pell Grant services, our federal student aid services. So this is an agency that does not set curriculum. It does not provide the majority of funding to our schools, but it provides additional funding. So students who are at Title I schools receive Title I funding from the Department of Education, IDEA funding, so that individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that funding comes through the Department of Education for students with IEPs and 504 plans. Like I said, Pell Grants and federal student aid, as well as the Office of Civil Rights is also in the Department of Education. So that makes sure that our students' civil rights are protected and there are accountability measures so that federal education legislation is happening all across our country, and it is not different state by state depending on what the support in that state is for public schools.
So let's go ahead and go back a little bit. You said a lot of key vocabulary: IDEA, Title I, Civil Rights Office. Can we just define those a little bit for some of our newer listeners? Because we have a spectrum of future teachers here. Some are just starting college and some are on the job hunt, and everybody in between. So would you mind defining what Office of Civil Rights does, Title I schools, and then IDEA?
Yes. So the Office of Civil Rights, to my knowledge, is from the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the protections from that act. So that includes national origin, gender, religion, and many more other identities are
Right.
protected from discrimination. And the Office of Civil Rights is the channel to go through to make sure that any discrimination issues are dealt with. Yes. IDEA is the acronym for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and that is funding for our students with disabilities. So students who receive individualized education plans, those are IEPs, and 504 plans receive funding through the Department of Education for our students with disabilities. I had an IEP in school, so that's very personal to me to make sure that our students continue to receive their services because it is very important. Title I services, Title I is legislation that supports our schools in low income areas. So I think it ties to schools and the amount of students who are on free and reduced lunch. If there is a certain threshold of how much income or socioeconomic status an area has, and if there is the majority of students receiving free and reduced lunch, I believe there's a correlation there with the services, the Title I funding that they receive.
When I'm thinking about all these services, we have civil rights, we have Title I, we have IDEA and students with special needs. Does the Department of Ed also help to make sure for our students with special needs that their services are being met and that the students are getting the services that they require too? Is this a resource that family members and school districts can reach out to make sure that the students that are in special education are receiving their services so they can be successful and have access to the curriculum?
Yes, it
Mm.
is there for accountability to make
Yeah.
sure that from state to state, those services are being met, that it's not
Mm.
dependent on your zip code.
Yes. Which brings us to the importance of the Department of Ed. You defined all the facets of the Department of Ed and how it supports our learners. And I'm sure some of our students or our future teachers listening in are thinking, okay, Pell Grant, federal aid, those might be buzzwords. What do I do if the Department of Ed gets dismantled? And I don't know where I put my information, where the funding's coming from. But beyond the funding piece, why is this important for our future teachers who are going out to get jobs? Why is this important for them to know about the role of the Department of Ed and the impact it could have on them?
Yeah. The Department of Ed impacts the individual classrooms that are in our schools. It impacts our students. It is this federal agency that happens to be housed in Washington, D.C., but the impact is felt in all of our individual classrooms. And so, as a future educator, as a first year teacher, a veteran teacher, as a retired teacher, your students in your classroom will be impacted by
Mhm.
services from the Department of Education. So it's really important to know that we have federal legislation to make sure that the public education around our country is high quality, equitable for our students, no matter where they live. And so being aware that the department provides all these services is very important because it will be our jobs to ensure that our students are receiving high quality education. And when we can't do everything as an individual, it's important to know that there are checks and balances, there are accountability measures, and there are funding sources that are available and that we should be advocating for to make sure that our students are receiving that best education.
Absolutely. So we might have some people that say like, oh, it might be nice if things go back to the states. Why? What are the pros and cons of that argument? Oh, Department of Ed, let's go back to our states and see what they can do.
Yes. When hearing about the argument of going back to the states, a lot of rhetoric that I've heard is that we want our schools to be in charge of the curriculum that our students are learning. And that already happens. The
Yeah.
Department of Education is not in charge of any national curriculum. We do not have that. The legislation for No Child Left Behind as a lot of my education. And that is no longer the legislation of that is like out there running our national agenda for education anymore. And so the schools at the local level, our local school boards and our state boards of education are the deciding factors of what is taught in our schools. So that is already decided by our states. Our states are already providing the majority of funding that goes into our schools. However, not every state has the same opinion about how our students with disabilities should be receiving services. Not every state and local has the same opinion about what counts as discrimination in our schools. And that can vary from culture to culture, from community to community. And so by having a national department that is not there to set curriculum, it is not there to control what is taught in our schools, but is there to provide those additional funding streams so that our low-income students and our students with disabilities not falling through the cracks is incredibly important to have that federal accountability check. I moved a lot throughout my schooling, and so I started my education up in Alaska on Kodiak Island, and then I moved to a small town in Kansas, and it was a vastly different education. And then I moved to a suburb of Kansas City, and I remember just being aware that the education was different, but I couldn't really place my finger on why, or it didn't make sense to me, like why I was receiving a different education than, say, my older sister. Because I was like, my older sister's just as smart as me. We both worked so hard. And why did I have these opportunities that she didn't? And it was because there were different levels of socioeconomic status in our areas. So the funding of our schools was different. And I got to see firsthand that in low-income areas, we were receiving a vastly different quality of education. And those were the schools in which we were receiving title services. But it's important that we continue to say, no, we need our schools to be equitable no matter what. We need to make sure that our students are receiving still high quality education. And so having a federal department provided additional funding, obviously could have done more, but it was more than nothing. And by dismantling the department or by moving services around, that sets us backwards and puts us in a spot where our schools need more funding. The solution is figuring out how our schools can become high quality and equitable and maintain as a public service, so that no matter what your parents are making or where your parents are from or where you happen to be living or born, you receive a high quality education.
If you need special education services, you have access to that. Additional funding through the Department of Ed, have access to that. And it's just safeguards, checks and balances, making sure everyone has a high quality public education. Now, Hannah, I attended a NEA webinar 2 weeks ago with Becky Pringle, and she had wonderful speakers sharing about the quality of public education and what they are doing to help support the Department of Education. At the beginning of each speaker's session where they spoke, she had a slide up that said how much that state was receiving with IDEA, Pell Grants. Yes, you know what I'm talking about?
I do, yes.
Do you by chance know that website so we can link it in our notes and people can go and look to see, oh, this is how much my state is getting from the Department of Education from our federal funding?
That was really impactful to see every single speaker from every different state showing up saying these millions of dollars will be no longer available for students in my state. That this is not just something happening up here in Washington, D.C. This is happening to all of our states and to all of our local schools.
Yes, it was so impactful to see that from Title I funding, Pell Grants, career technical education. If something happens to the Department of Ed, all these millions of dollars are going to be taken away. And so I'm
Mhm.
looking really quickly at the site. I don't know if I can click on my state, but I'm scrolling down to Pennsylvania and I see grants to local education agencies. This is Title I, ESCA 735.7. And it just goes on and on. There's a whole list that you can see the funding for that for your state. So go ahead and check it out. We'll put it in the show notes so you have access to it.
And in Pennsylvania, you all have one of the highest memberships for aspiring educators within I didn't know if you know that. Yeah, go PSEA. A lot of aspiring educators rely on Pell Grants. And I took out federal loans, and I know many other aspiring educators rely on those to complete our degrees and become licensed and certified educators. So this is impacting aspiring educators in Pennsylvania as well as all across the country.
In this episode, we talked a lot about what the Department of Ed does, why it's important to keep around and to continue on and not taking a step backwards. What can we do as constituents? What can we do as future teachers to help push back on the dismantling of Department of Ed?
Yeah. There are many things we can do that range from individual to collective. NEA has a number, it's 48744. If you text the word action, ACTION, then it will immediately connect you. It'll ask, what's your zip code? And your zip code will then connect you to your legislator. It will even provide you with a call script saying, this is the importance of the Department of Education. You will be connected to this office, connecting you now. So it's very easy to call your representative because the Department of Education was created through Congress. The department cannot be erased and dismantled by an act of the president. The president does have the power to fire federal employees, so that can cause an impact and lead towards the lessening of services because there's less people who know the job. But it is an act of Congress that started the department and can end the department. So by calling your representative and telling them to do everything in their power to keep the Department of Education and the services that are there for our students and the checks and balances, that goes a very long way. If you are public school graduate, talking about being a public school graduate makes an impact. If you had an IEP or a 504, that you are a real person who was receiving funding, that this money is not just going out there and then does nothing or makes no impact. It impacts people every single day. If you're a college student receiving a Pell Grant or you have student loans, telling your representative about those makes an impact. When I've spoken with legislators, they've mentioned that the most impactful things that change their minds and can change their colleagues' minds who might be across the aisle from them is the stories, the personal stories from their constituents, and specifically their constituents who are in their areas. If you are in Washington, so I would not call a Pennsylvania legislator because I'm not their constituent. So calling the individuals who represent you makes a big impact. Another way to show solidarity and to be involved in the movement in a low risk, very easy way, wear red for ed. And on Wednesdays, explain why you're wearing red for ed. Why do you care about public education? Why is it important for other people who are educators or not to care about these public services and making sure that they are maintained? I also am working on a biweekly solidarity options and resources that I am posting onto our NEA Aspiring Ed Instagram. So I'll be posting on there ways to show solidarity on your campus, ways to show solidarity in your community, resources from the NEA for solidarity tools. And so those will be available on our Instagram regularly, and they'll be there forever as long as that account is up, staying connected to your union. If you're an aspiring educator, current educator, retired, then there are many opportunities to be connected, to have resources. And there's also trainings to learn organizing skills. So if you are in it for the movement and you're ready to take action, take collective action, and grow your organizing skills, there are resources such as NEA's Campaign Lab, where there is funding to go to create campaigns for issues and work on solving them in your community and your local, as well as solidarity trainings through Public School Strong. So there are lots of things out there depending on your availability, your interest, and how much you would like to invest into the future of public education.
I love that you gave so many options. I would say the first one would definitely to be to text 48744 with the word action, ACTION. That's how I first got involved. And I went through that prompting. Let's talk about your zip code and calling now. I'm more of a
Me
texter,
too.
emailer kind of gal.
Mhm.
Yeah. And having that script was so helpful, albeit I did leave several voicemails
Yeah.
for my different representatives, but hey, it was something, right? I saw this video on Instagram where it had somebody sitting there with a bottle of paint, and this person's pushing the bottle of paint towards the edge of a table. And their point was if you don't have a action that's going to push back on this bottle of paint, it's going to spill everywhere. So no action is going to continue the paint
Mhm.
going over the table and spilling. Having some sort of pushback, small impacts can or small movements can make an impact. For those listening, if I call or email my representative, what good is that going to do? It's just going to be an automated email or whatever. It's not going to do anything. Is this information tracked anywhere by the legislators' staff or anything? Like, how do we know it's really making a difference?
Yeah, the legislators, staffers who are on the receiving end of the call, they write down every call that comes in from constituents, whether it's voicemail or they answer the phone, they write down the information and they share it to the representative or senator every day. If anyone is interested in sharing their story with NEA, NEA is also preparing lawsuits and litigation. And so there have been members, including aspiring educators, who have shared their experiences, and then those have been included in actual lawsuits against the president. Sharing your story makes a big impact, whether it's to your legislator or to your union if you're a union member.
And for those whose ears perked up, wait a minute, I want to share my story. What are their next steps?
Oh, great question. Sharing with NEA, I believe they have a short URL. Usually they have NEA.org/ maybe it's share. It is NEA.org/share. And it pops up and you can leave your contact information and sharing your story. And they give you an option of, can we share your story? Either in print, online, with the press, or with members of Congress, or you can say, no, do not share. So you can share there easily, NEA.org/share.
Awesome. Hannah, this has been such an illuminating conversation. We talked about what the Department of Ed does, why it's important for our future teachers to know about, how it's going to impact them as college students, as first-year teachers, and just in general in that classroom space. But we not only talked about the problem of dismantling the Department of Ed and what effect that would have, but also what we can do about it, from texting 48744 and the word action to there's also on NEA's website a spot where you can fill out your information. It'll give you a form email to send that you can personalize if you would like. You can also get involved in trainings to help organize and wearing red for ed. Let's start doing that, friends. Let's start pushing back because we need public education. We need it for our students. Our students need to receive those high quality public education, access to public education. They need to be supported, included in that learning process. And it needs to be that checks and balances, that accountability. Hannah, thank you so much for an informative and an actionable interview.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
And there you have it, EduMagicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more EduMagic, check out sfessage.com and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram @sfessage. Until next time, you have the EduMagic within you.